Hello and welcome to the UK CIF Leadership Podcast. It's Oscar here on day 5 of COP26, discussing UK leadership on promoting youth retail investing. Really excited to announce our guest speaker for our podcast today. We're joined by Duncan Grierson, the founder and chief executive of Clim8 Invest, a UK CIF member. Clim8 Invest is a digital investment platform for people looking for a simple way to invest in their future and the future of the planet. It's the only investment platform to exclusively select companies and funds that are focused on tackling the climate crisis that we face and bringing about positive change in the process.
Hello, it's James and Sally here to let you all know about our podcast sponsor.
This COP26 series of the UK CIF Leadership Podcast is sponsored by Lion Trust. We're delighted to have them involved. Lion Trust is a specialist fund management company that was founded in 1995.
And as of July 2021, they had £34 billion in assets under management. Their aim is to have a positive impact on their investors, stakeholders, and society.
We're so pleased to have them on board for this series. Without the support of our partners, the podcast would not be able to happen.
So, without further interruption, let's get on with the episode.
Thanks so much, Duncan, for joining us for our podcast at COP today. It perhaps makes sense to start off with, what made you found Clim8 initially, and what were some of the issues that you saw, Duncan, in the financial services industry that you wanted to address?
Hi, Oscar. Great to be here. Yeah, so my background, I've spent the last 20 years building and investing into clean tech companies. So a range of different companies in the sustainable space, from biofuels to recycling to solar energy storage. And then a couple of years ago, I was noodling on the idea of raising a sort of a dedicated venture capital fund to focus just on these kinds of areas. And then I guess I had this sort of a light bulb moment. I realized that this kind of product investment space could be, really interesting for everybody. And I did some research and couldn't find any other platform that was focused on what we call climate impact investing. And so, yeah, we spent the last 2 years building this platform. We've been live for quite 6-7 months now in the App Store, so you can go and download it now. It's got a very low investment threshold, so that definitely fits sort of the younger investment audience. And I guess what was missing in the market, more specifically, was a provider that would build you a portfolio of companies that are just focused on making a difference in climate change. And so our portfolios are focused on kind of 6 core themes: so clean energy, clean technology, smart mobility, circular economy, clean water, and sustainable food. And even today there is no other platform doing just that. And this is not a niche. This is a very big area. All of these sectors are big and growing, and carbon is embedded in everything we do from the moment we wake up in the morning. How we eat, how we clothe ourselves, how we transport ourselves, the places we live and work. There's carbon everywhere, and so we think there's just a very large investment opportunity as well to not only make a difference, make an impact with your money, but also get a good return.
Thanks very much, Duncan. And you say that one of the segments for the platform is the kind of younger investor. And I suppose throughout the pandemic, we've seen, lots of the kind of millennial generation and younger people get interested in investing, which is fantastic. And I suppose have more of awareness of the power that their investment decisions can have in affecting positive change, whether that's on the environment or society more widely. Do you think that the COVID-19 pandemic has kind of fostered this awareness? And do you think, what opportunities does it offer for more sort of socially conscious, environmentally conscious brands of investing?
Yeah, for sure. I think COVID has accelerated big time the interest in sustainable investing and in climate change. Excuse me, more broadly. Everybody's heard Greta and David Attenborough, and I think now people are looking for solutions. They want to make a difference. They want to, personally have an impact. And they're looking for those kinds of positive solutions And there's now several pieces of research that you can have a bigger impact with your savings and with your pension than all of the other behavioral changes, things like flying less, cycling more, eating less meat, switching to a green energy provider, all those things we need to be doing, but you can actually have a bigger impact with your money. And I guess perhaps what is exciting for a younger generation of investors is that we have a beautiful looking way to provide access to these kinds of products through your smartphone. Everyone's got these in their pocket, and you can onboard in 5-10 minutes and be making an impact very, very quickly. And so I think the idea of kind of democratizing access to these kinds of products, which used to be specialist products for everybody, including the young, I think that's very exciting and new.
It is super exciting, Duncan. And that's something that that same sort of thoughts are coming through from UK CIF members day to day. It's very much being driven, ESG solutions by clients, including younger savers. So it's obviously fantastic news. I suppose with that though, on the flip side is more opportunities, the growth of the market, but also lots of issues that we see as well. A lack of common definitions for what defines sustainable and ESG. And because of that, we see the issue of greenwashing emerge increasingly in the industry in recent months, which we collectively all realize we need to take action on. Very difficult question perhaps to answer, but let's give it a go. How do you think we can collectively together address this issue of greenwashing? And I guess linked to that, how can we ensure that savers are really digging under the hood and investigating the ESG credentials of the funds in which they invest in?
Yeah, I think it's about transparency and digging. So I think a lot of fund managers have been using ESG as a marketing tool to capture assets, capture money from investors, and they've kind of jumped on the kind of greenwashing bandwagon. And there was a piece in The Economist a few months ago that said the top 20 largest ESG funds in the world on average hold 17 fossil fuel companies, which is completely bonkers if you think that you're having an impact with your savings via investing in one of these funds. And it's not just fossil fuels, it's also tobacco and alcohol and weapons. These funds all hold companies in those sectors. So for us, it's about transparency. It's about looking for what is in those portfolios. So if you ask your pension fund manager, what are my top 20 holdings, and they give you some wishy-washy answer, then sort of the alarm bell should be ringing. I also just think generally the whole ESG space is a massive missed opportunity. I think we've seen trillions of dollars, pounds, all around the world moving into these ESG funds, and actually they're having very little impact because this money is not going into the companies that are having an impact. And that's why we at Clim8, we're focused just on these core themes, in particular clean energy and clean tech and smart mobility. These are the sectors that are moving the dial. And these are not just sort of companies that are doing their best to reduce the kind of negative externalities of their products, but are genuinely have a product themselves which is making a difference, which is moving the dial. So yeah, I think it's about raising awareness, and it's about each of us finding out what is in the portfolio of my pension fund, in my savings. And if you don't get good answers, then you can be pretty damn sure that there's probably some greenwashing going on.
That's really interesting here. And I think something that we get a lot of from our members is this idea of investor stewardship and making sure that that's much more robust, and ensuring that shareholders are using their role to engage with company boards year round, and making sure that the managers of these companies and the boards are really taking decisions in the long-term interest of the company and taking into account material ESG factors. I don't know, Duncan, where you stand on that issue, or if there's more that can be done from a kind of stewardship perspective, or whether you guys look at that.
Well, we're really focused on the companies that are making a sort of a direct difference with their products. But for sure, if you've got a different flavored portfolio, which may have some companies that are, I guess, trying really hard to move the dial in terms of reducing the negative externalities of their products, the scope 3 emissions that are created by their own products. For example, the steel industry and the cement industry are massive emitters of carbon, but there are some good quote unquote companies within each of those sectors that are trying really hard to reduce the emissions. So if you are a pension fund manager and have some of those companies in your portfolio, then you should be trying pretty hard to engage with those companies and making sure they're doing the right thing, making the right decisions in terms of their products. And so that's voting, that's engaging with those companies.
That's great. That sounds very much in sync with UK CIF's thinking. So that's really positive to hear, Duncan. I think switching back to kind of the COVID-19 pandemic and the impact that has had on the younger generation's views. I mean, there's this whole, very topical issue of the alleged trade-off between ESG and financial performance. Do you think that's now finally changing? Or do you think, UK CIF and all of us still need to sort of try and address that issue? Is it very much something that you kind of see with, your clients day to day?
Yeah, I mean, I think the word in a sentence the most that was alleged. I mean, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, we've certainly seen in our portfolio the returns, if anything, are better than sort of benchmarks. So, part of our mission is to dispel this myth that you need to give up returns when you invest in these companies that are having impact. This is not charity. This is not only having an impact with your money, but it's also, we believe, the best place to be investing, because these companies in clean energy, clean tech, sustainable food, circular economy, these companies are literally the future. And as we as consumers move away from the companies which have bad quote unquote products to companies that are making a difference with low carbon products, it seems pretty obvious that if we're as consumers moving to them, then you're likely to do well as an investor in those companies. And that's what we have seen, and I think others are seeing across the board, that actually sustainable investing in the kind of purest sense is actually good investing, and it can give you very good returns. So I think the pandemic has helped that. I think you and others, people like us, sort of banging the drum about that, are making a difference. I think we're doing a decent job on that, but I think much more needs to be done. I think the general public probably still doesn't appreciate that as much as it could, and so much more work to be done on that.
Thanks so much, Duncan. I think maybe turning to the role of policy and regulation. Clearly the industry has a role to do in combating this misconceptions around the alleged trade-off between performance and ESG. But then also, the industry needs the signals and the pressure really coming from politicians at Westminster and the financial regulators. I mean, what more do you think they could be doing, perhaps, to encourage the growth of ESG retail investing? What do you think that has any reflections on their kind of record, or more that they could do you think?
Yeah, I mean, various regulators around the world are now looking hard at this topic of what is ESG. There is very little regulation right now of what you can call an ESG fund, and so, as I said, as many people have now said in the last few months, there's a whole ton of greenwashing going on. So I think the FCA in the UK is looking hard at this, the SEC in the US, the European Union, everybody's looking at creating a taxonomy to best define what can be genuinely badged as an ESG fund. But I think from our perspective, it'll be still incredibly difficult for those funds to really have genuine impact unless you have if you like, almost a new category, which is something we're calling climate impact, which is how you really move the dial. So yes, you can have ESG funds which do a much better job in terms of being better defined. Are these genuinely net zero focused companies? But I think we are, if we're going to really make a difference on climate change in the next 8 years, which is all we've got left, we are running out of time, and obviously COP26 this week is powerful. Hopefully, we need more people putting the money into what we're calling climate impact investing, which is frankly actually a completely different category from ESG investing. ESG investing is about screening out the baddies, if you like, and holding just the better companies in terms of negative externalities. But actually, that's not enough. We need to be making an impact with our savings. And that's what we're trying to do at Clim8. We're a tiny little company right now, but we're trying to make a difference. And if others can also be more focused on these companies that are genuinely moving the dial in clean energy, clean tech, sustainable food, areas where carbon can be reduced significantly, that's what we believe we all need to be investing into.
That's really interesting. I think that's really helpful also for our audience to make that distinction between pursuing the opportunities in terms of impact investing, and also rather than just, I suppose, considering ESG as part of the sort of usual investment process. So that's helpful. But do you think, I suppose, on the former, on climate impact and investment, are there enough investable opportunities, do you think, at the moment? Could government do more? What do you find in your experience, Duncan?
Yeah, so in the climate impact space, our portfolios hold over 400 stocks. These are globally listed companies that we've researched, bottom up, and found. We have an in-house investment team, which I think is unusual for a fintech, certainly one of our size. We're still relatively small. We're 37 people now, and growing, but still, we're still a tiny little company. So if you do the homework, you can find these companies. There is a big enough universe, and I think what's perhaps even more interesting is there's more and more of them coming. So as consumers, as we move more towards these types of companies which have genuinely good products which are making a big difference, then those companies are likely to end up getting listed, and then we can invest into them as well as listed companies. So that universe is likely to get bigger as well.
Fantastic. That's a very optimistic message. And I think, we are speaking, during the week of COP26. See, the eyes of the world are on the UK. I don't think we can sort of have this conversation, Duncan, without addressing kind of COP, slightly off the agenda, perhaps, that we agreed before. But I don't know, Duncan, if you've got any reflections on your kind of hopes for COP, or indeed, how closely will you be following proceedings in Glasgow?
Oh yeah, so we've been following really super closely. So look, for us, the biggest thing that could come out would be a carbon tax. So generally pricing in the negative externality of carbon emissions, which is not happening right now. Companies are allowed to put out products in the market with heavily polluting a whole range of different industries, and this is not just fossil fuels. This is the agricultural sector. This is clothing and fast fashion. It touches every single thing we do. Carbon, it's everywhere. And so having a carbon tax or a carbon price on goods is really the only way we're going to get there in time. So what we're doing, investing in the right things, is can be impactful. But what we really need is top-down government regulation, and this needs to be global on carbon pricing. It's really the only way forward. And there will be some complexities around that. We need to make sure that some people are helped in that transition. Having a carbon price could potentially impact more heavily people with less money, and so this is a highly complex question, but we're simply not going to get there in terms of getting to a sustainable planet, a healthy planet we can all live on, and our children and grandchildren, and the next generations, unless we have some form of carbon tax. So that would really be our big ask for and hope for COP26.
That's great. That's a sort of similar ask that we have of government as well. We called for in our policy vision report earlier this year for government to consider some sort of carbon pricing mechanism. How exactly that works is very up in the air, but it was very positive to see this on the agenda of the recent G20 meeting in Italy. So it's good at least that policymakers are at least considering these things. We're coming towards the end of our conversation, very sadly, Duncan, but perhaps, very mindful that a lot of those listening into our podcast today will be UK CIF members. So, perhaps to conclude our conversation, Duncan, are there sort of one or two things or messages that you'd like, for the industry to kind of take away for today?
Right. I guess just really just sort of doubling down on what I said earlier about sort of ESG versus climate impact investing. We think, ESG is likely to get tightened up, is likely to improve, we hope. But to be genuinely impactful, you need to be putting your money into companies that are putting products into the market with much lower carbon impacts. And so, as a community, as an association, it'd be great if more people would be doing, what we're doing, if you like, a sort of pure play, and focus really around that.
Thanks very much, Duncan. Some very clear messages for those listening today. Thanks so much for your time, Duncan. I think that kind of wraps everything up. It's been a really excellent discussion, and we've covered a lot of ground in this podcast. Just to say to our listeners, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tune into our other episodes coming up throughout COP26 in Glasgow. You can find us on Twitter @UKCIF, all one word. Speak very soon.